Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait another minute or two as folks are filing in to ensure that everyone can catch the start of the webinar. So just hang tight and we'll be with you in a minute. If you're so inclined as you're coming in, just drop in the chat who you are and what organization you're with. It'd be interesting to see what the range and scope of groups from across the country is. All right, folks, I think we will get started. Rewards for punctuality. So, hi everyone. My name's Bruce McDonald. I'm the CEO here at Imagine Canada, and just want to welcome all of you to today's session. Really delighted that you have taken time either now, live, or a little bit later to listen to the recording and spend some time with us as we are thinking about, heading towards the year end. It's really important as organizations are heading into this vital part of the holiday season, which in Canada is still very much the season of giving, that as they're looking towards the last few weeks, as we're on a sprint to the end of the year, and then really even early into 2026, that we're thinking about some of the broad issues facing our sector. And we're really delighted to be partnering with Enkel on this webinar, which you'll hear a little bit more about. Before we go too far, though, we'd like to kick off with a land acknowledgement. Given that we are from across the country, we'll use Imagine Canada's for this particular purpose. Imagine Canada's staff, operations, work, and network depend on traditional Indigenous territories to provide us physical space, sustenance, safety, and community to work, live, and play. Our physical head office is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. We acknowledge that these lands are covered by Treaty 13 and the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. We acknowledge these lands are still home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. We acknowledge that our ability to live and work on these lands today is a direct benefit of policies of expulsion and assimilation of Indigenous peoples during the time of settlement and confederation and since. The harms of these policies are many and are still being felt in Indigenous communities today. We express gratitude towards the Indigenous peoples who have and will continue to steward these lands. We commit to amplifying the voices of Indigenous peoples and working against the everyday forces of white supremacy and colonialism present in the nonprofit sector. So that's part of our land acknowledgement. There's an expanded version on imaginecanada.ca, including resources that if you're looking for similar land acknowledgements for your own organization, you can go and get some of the resources there. So, next up, just a reminder that this session is being recorded. Folks will receive their recording tomorrow. And I'm delighted to introduce our panelists to you today. So, we've got Duke Chang, the CEO at Canada Helps, Omar Vistram, the co founder and head of growth at Enkel, and Charlene Krupakevich, who has had a long career in the sector and is the chair of the board of Imagine Canada. So, with that, Omar, I'm going to pass the baton to you to help set the table before we get into our conversation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bruce. So honored and delighted to be here today. In terms of agenda for today, of course, our topic, we're going to dive deep into it and really have a panel discussion where you'll hear from all of us. At the end, we will have an opportunity for an interactive Q&A discussion, so please do ask your questions either throughout the session or at the end. I'm first going to tell you a little bit about Enkel. So I started Enkel in 2016 with my co-founder and really came together around this idea that you can't build a great organization without good books. I had spent most of my career up until this point at KPMG, really unable to find a great solution for my clients. And so we launched Enkel in 2016. Today we are 300 clients, 100 of which, over 100 of which are not-for-profit organizations across the country. We do provide, really, if you think about our business, two distinct services. So financial management is one of them. We offer fractional controllership and CFO services, as well as financial operations services. So that is all of the transaction processing in bookkeeping, payroll, and accounts payable. Our head office is located here in Vancouver, where I am today. And just to briefly acknowledge that our offices are situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I also want to add that Enkel is SOC 2 certified, so we do hold your data to the very highest standard of privacy and security, um, and our systems are audited every year for that. Let's move forward just to tell you a little bit more specifically about what we do, particularly in a not-for-profit and charity context. So bookkeeping and accounts payable are sort of the core offering. Our bookkeeping is done on an accruals basis following accounting standards for not-for-profit organizations. We do use some of the latest and greatest in technology. You may have heard of some of it, QuickBooks Online and Dext and other industry-leading tools. Payroll services, we do offer as well. We take care of all of the compliance, T4s, record of employment forms. We help you implement systems to track employee time. And then on the controllership and CFO services, organizations today can, through this service, gain access to very senior level finance support without having to have these people on the payroll. So it really helps to um, lower the barrier and bring greater access to these very talented people to help you with year-end audit support, cash flow planning, budgeting, forecasting, and even support governance initiatives, financial policy, and such. All right. Now, let's briefly cover, just to sort of set the scene of what we'll be discussing today, the nonprofit finance landscape as we see it today. Um, Now, I feel like I've been saying this for a long time, but this data point really, to me, articulates how serious the issue is today. So nonprofits are in a classic squeeze, being asked to do more with resources that feel ultimately less certain. But according to the Charity Insights Canada project, 31% of Canadian charities are expecting a deficit in 2025, while only 15% of respondents to this survey foresee funding growth in 2026, reinforcing that, the squeeze is really intensifying. We're hearing this over and over again from our clients. They're increasingly concerned about inflation, operational costs, and funding uncertainty. Um, Trust. So this is another area that we spend a lot of time talking to our clients about. Um, we are getting a significant number of requests for more granular data so that executive directors can share information to their board, to their stakeholders. Um, and that request seems to be nonstop this year. The good news is that public trust in charities does remain high at 57%, but we have to remember that this trust is fragile. Donors want to see where their money is going. The top factors for trust are ensuring donations reach the end cause and that the charity achieves its purpose. So, to the extent that an organization can demonstrate this with their financial data, the better. And then, of course, this is top of mind for many people is digital disruption. And we have learned, I've learned particularly since starting Enkel, that Continuity today is really not possible without digital tools. They're essential not only for fundraising, but also for creating a stronger, more resilient, and adaptable organization. So, this data point here from the 2025 Nonprofit Technology Ecosystem Trends Report released by Omatic Software noted that 79% of nonprofits are now using more than 5 third-party systems, which is up from 62% just a year ago. And AI exploration is widespread, which I'm really happy to see in the second study from TAP Network and TechSoup. 85.6% of nonprofits are experimenting with generative AI, yet only 24% have formal AI strategy and strategies in place. We actually did a webinar on this earlier this year. It's on our website. But there is a lot of discussion around sort of fear around using AI and lack of policy. And so that webinar actually gives you a bit of a start on what to start thinking about so that you can roll out your AI strategy. So the path forward, just to sort of summarize and sort of frame where we're heading with this panel today, really the goal, of course, is to keep building a foundation for long-term impact. That never changes. But this ultimately requires a proactive approach centered on financial resilience and really strategic leadership. Three important pillars, you'll hear a lot about it today, but revenue diversification. So reducing reliance on single funding streams, exploring new opportunities, being more innovative with your funding sources, engaging the board strategically. This is one where there is, I think, great opportunities for nonprofits to unlock some of the talent at the board level. And really not just using the board for oversight and compliance, but having the board help to drive the organization forward. And then finally, embracing a data-driven mindset. So using technology, not just for efficiency, but to gain insight and to ultimately help you understand what your donors are doing and what they're saying. All right, passing it back over to Bruce now. I'm
Yeah,
going to stop sharing
who
so that we can do the full panel here.
who's going to lob the ball right back to you? Because Omar, we're going to start with you on the first question because your last slide really summed up this idea that organizations need to be thinking innovatively about their work. So, as someone who co-founded Enkel back in 2016, you kind of bring a founder and entrepreneur mindset to this conversation. So, we know that many organizations continue to repeat the revenue generation and financial management activities from year to year. So, what do you think organizations can do to encourage more innovation and entrepreneurial thinking at both the staff and board tables? And how does technology, all things digital, and the use of data to inform decision making factor into these conversations?
Yeah. Great question, Bruce. There's a lot of layers to this, so let me try to break it down. But I love this question because I've always really believed that the best entrepreneurs and the best executive directors actually share a lot of the same traits. The strongest executive directors that I see are innovative, especially when it comes to problem solving and revenue generation. They're constantly, really looking for better ways to create value and strengthen sustainability. So the real opportunity, Bruce, is helping more organizations tap into that entrepreneurial mindset. A few thoughts here, and we've applied some of this at Ankle, and so you know, um, really, I think it's a little bit of getting out of that comfort zone and not just thinking about, the capacity constraints in front of us, but there's a few things that you can really do to stretch and move to the next level. One would be creating intentional space for experimentation. So at the end of the day, organizations rarely innovate by accident. You need to create some structure around this, particularly when it's new for the staff and board members to challenge assumptions. It can be as simple as a monthly, stop doing conversation, or some small pilots with new technologies. When people feel safe to test new things on a small scale and become comfortable with a little bit of failure, the innovation can sort of naturally perpetuate from there. The other thought I have here is to focus on the problem, not not really the inherited process. There's often this idea that, we just have to grind through, keep doing things the way we've been doing them. Entrepreneurs often don't start with how do we improve this process? They start with, is this even the right way to do it? So shifting the lens, um, you know, looking at what you're trying to achieve in the end, is this process even necessary? Can then allow you to build simpler workflows that really unlock a lot of innovation and opportunity. And then using data. And I don't want to, a lot of organizations can take this to the extreme, and then you spend a lot of time just collecting the data. So start small. This is where technology can really help. What can you do to just tap into the financial data that you have available in your accounting system, for instance? When organizations digitize their financial operations and integrate systems, they get access to trends. They start seeing donor behavior. Cash flow becomes easier to predict and understand. And then, of course, the role of technology. And I really want organizations and leaders on the call today to think, really hard about the role of technology in their organizations. We have a great opportunity with technology today. There is sometimes this fear that, technology is going to replace roles. We have a major capacity issue in the sector today. Technology can actually help to solve some of those capacity constraints. So I would say look at technology as an opportunity rather than a threat. Bruce, anything else there?
I no, I think that's great. And I think, for me, really hitting home this idea that innovation doesn't have to be this massive thing. It can
Oh,
actually be a practice, a small
yes.
way of taking steps to do things differently as
Yeah.
you've got your eye on the bigger prize.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Yeah. So Duke, we're going to come to you, and well, I do have a formal question. I want to make sure too you take a minute and maybe talk about the importance of what's on your T-shirt today. But before so I'll give you the question, then you can talk about that. So on November 4th, the federal government delivered its budget, and it was kind of a mixed bag for the nonprofit sector. In some areas, there was significant investment. In others, not so much, particularly this idea of a strong social safety net. This means that many organizations will need to rely on their other supporters even more. And as we now are heading into the home stretch for the holiday season, what are you seeing from a donation perspective at Canada Helps? Are Canadians responding the same way as in previous years?
Yeah, so the answer there, Bruce, is yes and no. Certainly with the federal budget, it was the type of budget where not everyone was going to get what they asked for, and there was going to have to be hard decisions made. Surprisingly, for the sector, we saw women and gender equality get pre-announced even. We saw significant funding into the arts, which we always thought would be a struggle. But given the push for more Canadian content, there was some push there. And then other areas, were weaker than expected. So when I look at the general Canadian giving landscape, the general trend still holds true as in past years, which is we're continuing to see those who have the ability to give step up and give more. Canadians are always generous, but the reality is fewer and fewer Canadians are having that capacity to give right now. So general trend continues, fewer donors, bigger donations, overall upward lift in this last year for sure, but still a concerning trend that the donor base is shrinking. And so we need to think about how do we grow the donor base again. Now, if I dig one click down deeper into that and look at, well, where are dollars flowing? There's been a bit of in the last couple of years, there's been a bit of a revision towards how giving historically was. So we had a big spike in between 21 and 22 towards international giving and because of the Ukraine war and other things that were going on around the world. This last year, a lot of the giving has come home. It's gone back towards regional and local causes and organizations. As we see, we have some challenges at home, and people want to support with their generosity the things that are happening right here in Canada. So that's an important trend to pay attention to. It mirrors what's happening globally, I would say, with international aid, as we know, but it is a significant shift back. The other area I would highlight is support for Indigenous organizations, Indigenous-led charities, Indigenous serving charities. That has seen a pretty significant jump in support in Canada Helps over the last few years. almost 400 or over 400%. But the reality is it's off of a tiny base. So giving to Indigenous organizations is still less than 1% of total giving in Canada. So some work to do there as well. So a bit of a mixed bag of results. We're seeing some organizations do better, some organizations struggling a little bit more. I think that's the danger in looking at big average numbers. When we talk about things that are going on, we really have to click down deeper. And certainly for anybody who wants to look at our giving report, we have some of those details in the giving report, and that's available for free on our website.
And 30 seconds on the t-shirt.
30 seconds on the t-shirt. Generosity is right here. This is Violet, our purple finch, and Scarlet, our red squirrel. They are the two central characters in our new children's book called Violet Song. It's a book that we wrote to help adults, parents and grandparents talk to their kids about important values like kindness and empathy and service to the community and generosity. Really big words that kids don't understand, but how do we bring those concepts down and teach them these values? And that's the purpose of Violet Song.
Very, very exciting.
Available everywhere.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
So Charlene, we're going to come to you now because you've had the opportunity to be both a CEO and the chair of a board. So what practical insights do you have as it relates to the role of a board in that it can or should be playing in ensuring the long-term financial health of an organization?
Yeah, great question. And I take this seriously because I come from that operational lens. I was a CEO and then now as a chair of a board. And so, the one thing that's sort of foundational to this question is around we have to understand that financial health directly impacts mission delivery. So without financial health, we can't deliver the programs and services in the community. And so the board's role is really safeguarding the mission and safeguarding the finances. So in my view, there's sort of three lines of sight here. And if you've done any sort of governance training, you may have heard this before. So these lines of sight include navigating with foresight, leading with insight, and while being anchored in oversight. And so I'll just dive into these a little bit deeper. So in our oversight role on the board, we have to understand what's going on in the business. So monitoring the present. So asking, how are we doing? Looking at results, questioning assumptions, looking at cost structures, assessing reserve levels and risk exposures, of course, without overstepping into operations. This is a governance role. And I would say most boards spend probably about 75% of their time in this oversight role, which is incredibly important. However, there are two other functional roles that the board needs to play in. The second role is around insight. And this is where boards need to dive deeper and really understand the present and take meaning from the information that's being provided. So this is asking the question around why. So if revenues are challenged, for example, in this insight role, boards should be working with the CEO and the management to understand why there's been a shift in revenue and how we can unlock the power of the board to support the revenue strategies. So this could be opening doors, attending meetings, amplifying messages, or supporting conversations around revenue diversification. So there's probably boards spend maybe 10-15% of their time on this sort of insight role. Now, I would argue that there's a third role, and this is the foresight role, which is really about building long-term financial sustainability. And foresight is looking ahead, anticipating the future, positioning for what's next. And this can include things like external research, succession planning, board renewal, so ensuring that the board skills are going to meet the needs of the organization in the future, not just today. Ensuring the CEO and the team have the capacity and the skills and support to execute into the future. So examples would be like, of course, AI. We're all talking about AI. How's that going to impact the programs and services and operations and the workforce? Crypto, where's that going to land? And the environmental risk, like some organizations have significant environmental risk, and we need to be looking at that and how that's going to impact strategies in the future. So in my view, there are these three lines of sight, and they're building blocks to short and long-term financial health. It's a balanced approach using foresight to sort of look at the future, set strategic direction, insight to deeply understand what's going on in the business, and then oversight to monitor the results. So these are all three pillars that need equal time on the agenda. And so I would really encourage boards to sort of look at the agenda and think about how much time are you spending on oversight versus insight and foresight, and trying to rebalance the agenda so that you're future focused. There you go, Bruce.
Thank you. And it's interesting as we think about Omar's ideas around kind of innovative practices. For a board, taking time on the foresight section might actually be an innovative practice, one that it hasn't necessarily been spending time on because it's so much focused on the here and now. So, there's how those can kind of toggle together in a way that, it doesn't cost anything, but it's really important to do. So Duke, we're going to come back to you. December 2nd marks the next Giving Tuesday. How can organizations maximize the attention that will be generated about the sector in order to inspire more contributions? Are there any good Giving Tuesday how-to gems that you've seen over the years?
There's a ton. There's a lot of resources that we continue to curate for Giving Tuesday. As many people out there know, we were one of the co-founders who brought Giving Tuesday movement to Canada, and we continue to be the supporter for Giving Tuesday in Canada. So if you go to our Giving Tuesday website, you'll see a ton of resources for charities. We've got pre-built marketing templates and email templates. If you're using our donation forms, we've got Giving Tuesday themed donation forms already built out there, a whole roadmap on how you navigate the whole giving season and not just the one day. Now let's talk about Giving Tuesday, the day itself. Really important that your organization figures out its participation. Our data shows that organizations that participate in Giving Tuesday raise about 20% more than organizations that don't. So it's a really impactful day to not only do your fundraising, but also remind your donors that you're there. Even a simple thank you on Giving Tuesday, recognizing them for their ongoing support, can go a long way. Now, I want to talk about two kind of important uh, tools in the toolkit on Giving Tuesday to activate potentially new donors that you might not be touching. One that where we're seeing a lot of growth right now is monthly giving. And in this time where people might not have a lot to give, getting them to at least commit to a small monthly gift instead of a one-time end of year big gift is pretty powerful because everyone is already used to the subscription economy, right? We subscribe to Netflix and Amazon and all these Spotify, all these other things. Convince them to subscribe to your cause and your charity. And that way you, as an organization, have steady, predictable income coming in, and you build that ongoing relationship with them. It's a very sticky product to use for fundraising because it often is set it and forget it. People set that up. It goes onto their credit cards on a monthly basis, and they don't have to think about it again. So really encouraging monthly giving. Set up on Giving Tuesday is one. And then the second area I'll highlight right now, given the market conditions, is the gifts of securities. So we've seen a huge growth this year in donors wanting to give securities as a more strategic and tax efficient way to give. If you're not already set up to do that, again, come to Canada Helps. We'll get you set up really quickly and get going on that. But that's a huge opportunity and a huge growth area for us. Now, donors, who do we go ask for? Everybody's going to go out to their traditional base. Everybody's going to go out to their existing donors. But I want you to think about two segments that you may not be tapping into yet that are really important, not only for today, but for the future. These aren't folks who are giving out of their wealth pocket yet because they don't have a wealth pocket yet, but they have a high potential for one in the future. And they do have the ability to give out of the income pocket right now. So I'm going to give you two acronyms. The first one, the first profile you want to look for is Henry. And Henry stands for high earning, not rich yet. These are people in typically white collar roles. They're earning 150K or more a year. So they're earlier in perhaps in their career, they haven't built up a lot of wealth yet, but they certainly have disposable income because they are high earning. So look for Henrys and figure out how to attract Henrys to your organization, even early on, even with those monthly gifts, because they will grow to be future significant donors. The second acronym I'm going to give you is DINK. And DINK is not like the pickleball dink, the ball going bing, bing, bing back and forth, but DINK stands for dual income, no kids. Again, another group of folks who have more disposable income because they have two earners We know those of us who have kids know how expensive they can be, but this is another potential donor pool for you to start curating now and stewarding now for growth in the future.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about the first one, but now I have a hankering for a chocolate bar. But I don't, I don't know what that is. But it's interesting with the whole Giving Tuesday thing. I think one of the brilliance of Giving Tuesday was it was never about brand control. It was always about brand expansion and innovation. And how could organizations take that and make it their own in a way that resonated for their mission, their cause, and the communities that they serve.
Absolutely. And draft off of what everybody else is doing out there on
Yeah.
Giving Tuesday too. We're going to have a ton of stuff going out through our media channels on Giving Tuesday. Follow us, repost that, leverage that content that we're going to create on Giving Tuesday for your own fundraising.
Yeah, that's great. Just a mention too. We've got a few more questions for our guests today. But if you've got questions or comments, please put them in the chat because we will have a few minutes to invite you to just ask what about what you're interested in. So with that, Omar, coming to you. So Enkel's website has the following statement. We weren't interested in creating just another traditional bookkeeping firm. We reimagined financial operations by applying a tech-driven approach to deliver speed, efficiency, and scale. I was really struck by that statement. We often hear about organizations trying to reimagine their work. Are there principles or tactics that you've employed when you were living this to bring it to life? And how can you see this working in financial leadership or a fundraising context? And, I guess also, do you have any examples that you can share from organizations that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely, Bruce. So when we started building Ankle, we really didn't want to just, refresh bookkeeping. We wanted to rethink it entirely. We asked, what should financial operations look like really in a world where teams are remote, systems integrate, and leaders need real-time insight? And that first principles approach is really something that I think any organization can apply, especially in finance and fundraising. I mean, we had the benefit of being able to, we had a blank slate. So we had no sort of pre-existing ideas about how things should be done, but there's no reason why you can't apply this net new in your organization today. Some principles for reimagining work that I really encourage internally at Ankle to this day are start with the outcome, not the workflow. So we don't really need more process. We need clarity, compliance, and timely data. So when you design backwards from the outcome, you strip away a lot of the unnecessary complexity. And next point would be to really digitize before you optimize. You can't really meaningfully reimagine work if your financial data lives in emails, PDFs, spreadsheets. Automating something as simple as accounts payable or integrating donor systems and eliminating manual reconciliations really unlocks time and helps to reduce errors. This next point here, I think, is an important one because I see this challenge a lot, but building for scale, not survival, even if the organization is not intending to, double next year. But what I mean by scale is really more sort of grounded in sustainability. So having approval workflows, making sure that payroll isn't dependent on one person or that a lot of processes don't revolve around the executive director. That's really how an organization can build better resilience. Um, and then using real-time visibility, real-time data to drive better decisions. So there's so many great plugin tools that you can just plug right into QuickBooks today that can help you understand your cash runway better, donor performance. So really get on that train, I would say. If I were to, illustrate one example for you, um, of how, us taking small steps to modernize, to adjust and actually not modernize, that's not the right term, to rethink, how it's had an impact. It's often hard to measure these things, but we have this client Point A, they're a Toronto-based not-for-profit focused on sustainable commuting. And the great thing is they measure everything. So they published on their website the results of implementing our workflows and outsourcing to us. And the numbers were actually quite interesting. They found that they reduced their financial workload by 64%, which they translated into a $13,000 savings. And this is not a large organization, right? They were able to eliminate duplication of efforts, photocopying, tracking paper receipts, and other paper-based processes that really has now freed them up to focus on their mission and not paperwork. So that's really a small step, right? But it had a huge impact. And this was now 5 years ago. We've been working with them ever since. So you can imagine how that, that $13,000 has compounded since then and the savings they've obtained since then.
That's amazing. A 64% change in savings on that is pretty amazing, regardless of the size of organization. So I know we've had a question come in around, for small organizations, with budgets of 200,000 or less, any suggestions around strategies to grow budgets and become more sustainable. Duke, thanks for jumping in. Invite the other panelists to do so as well. And we'll again be looking for more questions as we get going. But before we do, Charlene, we're coming back to you. Just find my spot here. Yes, we're going to talk about risk because I mean it's interesting. Often the conversations about innovation and risk kind of go hand in hand. So in this discussion, we've heard about the challenges of these times, the opportunities with things like Giving Tuesday, and how to think in more innovative ways. From the experience that you've had in the sector, how would you advise organizations to think about financial risk differently? This idea of maybe moving away from an inhibitor more to a smart enabler. Like any words of wisdom for both staff and boards who are often really dealing with this issue?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, the whole sort of risk function has evolved over the years, and it is time to kind of rethink this mindset. And certainly, understanding and managing risk is a key function of the board. But rather than look at it as it's sort of as a threat, boards can reframe risk from sort of that defensive posture to an offensive one and look at risk as a potential catalyst for innovation, for diversification and growth. So essentially sort of shifting that mindset from that inhibitor to an enabler. Now, that all sounds really great is in words, but practically what does that look like? So I'll dive into this a little bit deeper. So boards can take that risk framework, which is usually like a lengthy document, and look at it from a broader perspective. So rather than sort of hunting for blind spots, boards can foster a more resilient organization by embracing sort of a holistic view in which resiliency or adaptability, that mindset becomes this strategic enabler. So there's a couple of ways to look at this, and there's a number of strategic enablers, but I'll only talk about two today, and briefly touch on some of the others. So one of the first strategic enabler is sort of building financial resiliency. So most organizations sort of have several financial risks in their risk register, and each of these are incredibly important. But they're often assessed from kind of a rather narrow and sort of tactical lens. And so, for example, you could have a risk on your register that says, there's some risk around financial transactions if they're doing these things in-house. And, one of the mitigation strategies or tactics could be create a better policy. Which is, in itself a good response. But if we look at this more broadly, the risk could be reframed into sort of improving trust in our transactions by integrating new financial technologies. So this is a very proactive, sort of offensive strategy, and it helps organizations think differently, build capacity, sort of modernize, think about what tools could we use to address this risk. And it creates this sort of notion of innovation. So building financial resiliency isn't about removing, the risk lens, but thinking about it differently from a sort of inhibitor to an enabler. The other enabler that I'll talk about is building operational resiliency. And this is really about looking at, your operations and how you can think things through differently. So most risk registers have got like program risks. And this gives the board a line of sight into sort of the operational challenges that you're facing. And again, sort of the response to a program risk is often tactical. So, for example, you may have concerns or risks around maintaining service standards, like there's high demand, we don't have enough people, we don't have money. I know, I've been there. But you could reframe this and look at this from like a broader perspective. So instead of it being maintaining service standards, maybe you think about this for strengthening service standards through technology innovation. So again, sort of going back to what's been said by some of my panelists is it an opportunity to innovate? And in this case, you could be looking at sort of pilot projects, emerging models, and it allows you to iterate quickly rather than looking too big. You could test something. And this is this notion of innovation and giving room and space to think these risks through differently. So this optimizes sort of the upside rather than looking at the downside. So it's a mindset. And certainly there are other strategic enablers that we could talk about, such as reputational resiliency. This is about your brand promise and ensuring that you're delivering against your brand. Another strategy is enhancing your cultural resiliency, which is really about your people and your internal culture. Don't have time to go into all those today, but it's just an opportunity to rethink. How do you reframe the risks into an opportunity? And all of these enablers are certainly a way of rethinking and changing the risk mindset. They don't diminish the need to look at risk, but it turns it into a competitive advantage. And today, if there's one thing that I want to say is that one of the biggest risks for our sector is standing still. And really, we should be asking what's possible if we take this risk and what becomes impossible if we don't. So there you go. Back to
Yeah,
you.
thank you. This is great. So we've got a few questions that have come in, and what I'd like to do, I know, Duke, you've jumped in already in the chat on, some opportunities to grow with sustainable funding sources. I'm going to come back to you in a second, just to talk maybe a little bit more about social enterprises and what we're seeing in the sector there. And then Christine's question around workflow and outcome. Omar, I'm going to come to you on this one. How do we move beyond just tweaking antiquated processes? And then Charlene, this I think you're primed on this one in terms of ED and board succession planning, and maybe just any thoughts on that. So Duke, we'll start with you. Maybe to just build off the comments you've got, but maybe to speak more specifically about the opportunities in relation to social enterprise.
Yeah, so I mean, in general, I think we would all love for this to not be a stressful time of year where so much of the funding is coming in at the last moment. It's historically been one of the banes of many participants in the sector is this is a make or break time of year, and to think about that smoothing out over time and being so much less reliant on this time of year would be great. And so that's where monthly giving can come in, being able to smooth out that revenue curve for you to if you can flip some of your gifts to monthly gifts. They are more sticky. People do tend to set it and forget it. And they do keep you people connected to your organizations. And oftentimes they grow over time. People will come in and adjust their monthly gifts upwards as their income grows or their ability to give grows. Specific to social enterprise, this is not a new concept, but I think more and more charities are exploring it. And it used to be, it was sort of in the vein of only large charities were doing this. If you think about a hospital with a parking lot, or the Habitat for Humanity is probably the greatest example with the restore and the reselling of things. But you're seeing other smaller charities, where there's community-based organizations that have a thrift shop or some other ways of earning earned income versus gifted income. It's a great thing to think about what you could do as a charity to do that that's still mission aligned, right?
Mhm.
And that's the key, is finding something that is still mission aligned to you that allows you to create a different source of income and revenue model. But it doesn't come for free. And I think that's the important thing for everyone to consider. As Charlene has been so eloquently talking about governance, these things do require their own governance structures. You have to think about as sure Omar will tell you about, you have to think about the relationship between the nonprofit and the for-profit. You have to think about dual bookkeeping, all these other things that come with that. and whether that investment upfront is something your organization has capacity to take on.
And at times, thinking about the operations differently. You may be thinking about sales versus fundraising. Even though they're sort of akin to each other in terms of processes, it's often a different mindset when you're running a social enterprise. Yeah, Charlene?
Yeah, I'll just build on that. Thanks, Duke. Yeah, there's also another thing to think about. So often, our sector relies on events to generate income, and certainly that's a key strategy and a good one. However, these are sort of products that have a lifespan. So they go through the product life cycle. And so there'll be a peak for that particular event. And so it's really about knowing when is that peak and what are you innovating or thinking about to replace that? Because there will be a downside. This is typical of all these products, is that they go up and they start to go down. And when you start to see the trend going down, you need to be thinking about what do you replace it with, or how do you innovate this product to sort of have, model two or whatever that might be. So just building on Duke's comments there.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Thank you. So, Omar, over to you around processes and policies, and how can organizations move beyond just tweaking existing? Now, they've used antiquated, but even just existing processes to
Yeah.
think about improved workflow
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things here. There's to some extent no right answer, but I would say start small. And I would probably go to the place where you see clunkiness in technology. That's usually where you see clunkiness in process, and workflow. And if you start from there, the other thing is if this is sort of your first time really trying to revamp a process, pick something that kind of sits independently. And that's where, and of course, selfishly, I say accounting, but accounting, is sort of, while it does ingest data from all over the place, it can be sort of isolated. And that makes it easier to measure. It makes it easier to tell stories. And has a start, has a finish. So I would say start small. That would be a key thing. Look for clunky technology, and then pick something that's isolated where you can build it out as a project in a short window of time. People also want to see results, right? They want to see quick wins. So think about how you can do something that will have quick wins and inspire other innovative thinking like that.
Thank you. So, Charlene, we're going to come to you now on this question around managing risk. Maybe just speak to your experience around how organizations can embrace the need for ED or CEO and board succession planning to make sure that they have this continuity as they go through leadership changes. And we're seeing a lot right now because of executive directors or CEOs are nearing the retirement age.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, one of the biggest responsibilities of a board, in addition to financial sustainability, is around succession planning of the ED or the CEO, and also board renewal or succession planning. So, looking at that sort of foresight role is really sort of understanding that things will change, and inevitably leaders change, and having a plan in place to ensure that if it happens in the short term, you've got sort of internal capacity or a plan to bring in some supports in the short term. And then also have that long-term vision, like what skills are we going to need in the future, and start thinking about that. And that foresight discussion on the board agenda is that what are the skills of the future, and ensuring that you've got that sort of in the pipeline. And then on the board side of things, it's equally important to plan board succession and board renewal, because you need new skills. I mean, you need AI, you need knowledge about, like even crypto and these other new things that are coming down the pipe. So you need to always be looking at board renewal and succession planning. So who's terming out when? What does your skills matrix look like, and how are you planning for the future? And again, this is a foresight discussion that should be happening at the board table.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I'm just sort of following the conversation around monthly donors and bequests, and I can't resist the urge to jump in on this one, because I think this is so important. This conversation around legacy giving, because as we've been talking about risk, one of the things that we see is that a big risk to organizations right now is the loss of revenue that comes with the death of older donors. And that's pretty blunt, to be honest with you. But, as we're talking with organizations, I'm really asking two questions. If you've got donors in their 80s or 70s or whatever it is who have been really reliable, have you had a legacy or planned gift conversation? And what's the relationship that you're forging and building with their middle-aged children and potentially grandchildren? Because right now, that's mom and dad's cause. That's the adult who has been the supporter for years. And the risk to organizations is without starting those conversations that should a change happen and sometimes happen quickly, that they're exposed for the loss of those revenues. And so
Mhm.
I think it's really incumbent upon organizations to be thinking broadly, how are they inviting folks into their stewardship events, not just the donors themselves, but their families and extended families. So I'm going to come to each of you with the same question because we've had customized questions. And I think Duke will start with you, then we'll go to Charlene, and Omar will close with you in terms of, we're heading in to this season that, traditionally Canadians have, really stepped up and supported organizations. So as we head into the final weeks of this year and into 2026, what gives you hope for the future?
Lots of things give me hope, Bruce. I think that 2026 and beyond, I think the thing I look to is young people, broadly speaking. I think the generation that's coming into the workforce and coming into power in the workforce has tremendously different views on how society should work, potentially, but maybe because they've seen how it's swung the other way. And they feel emboldened and empowered to make change. And they're not waiting around. They're impatient. Uh, and so I think they can be great change makers and the type of change makers we need. And we need to support their growth and their ability to act on that change. And then I think even younger than that, I mean, these conversations that we're trying to have with younger folks with this book and everything else, we have the ability to inspire a different uh, a different Canada in the future, and that gives me hope.
And that's wonderful because we know that many of the institutions that fostered empathy, caring, neighborhood, community, they're not as strong as they once were. And so finding innovative practices like a children's book that talks about complex messages like generosity at an early age are so important. Charlene, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, like Duke, I'm also hopeful. I'm typically an optimistic person, and I believe that there is, really great things happening and will continue to happen. And one thing that I'm encouraged by is the amount of collaboration that's happening within the sector. And I think this is a bit of the new normal, and that they realize that there's more power in coming together, share ideas, strategies, and really trying to deliver greater impact. And I think donors like to see that. And there's been some good examples of greater collaborations sort of at the national level, but I would also encourage, that to happen at the local level, and really try to find partners that you can do things with, and you might attract a wider pool of supporters.
Amazing. And Omar.
So I'm an optimist and I love this question. But one of my mentors told me once that the best time to build a business, and I think the best time to build an organization, is really in hard times, right? It forces you to make some tough decisions, but if you make the right decisions, those decisions can help you thrive when things turn around. So I would say that this is the time to really not lose sight of the fact that you can make some significant changes. You can make some of those hard decisions. And the great thing about a lot of people on the call today is you work for organizations where your teams are so invested in your cause that you can really engage teams and really at this time come together, uh, find better ways of doing things, and move forward.
What a wonderful way to wrap up. So thank you to our panelists for taking time out of their very busy work schedules. Thank you to the over 400 people who signed up. And we had about a third live with us today. As I mentioned earlier, the recording will be going out tomorrow. but also thank you to all of you who tuned in and for the work that you do every day to ensure that you have strong communities. So with that, we'll wish you all the best as you head into the holiday season and looking forward to a strong and prosperous new year. So thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.